What's going on, good people of the internet? It is time once again for Comics Unmasked, the podcast where a bunch of folks shoot the breeze and talk about comic books and such. I had the honor of sitting down with the person who gave me my first ever comic interview ever back when the show was called Panel to Panel. David Pepose, writer of the indie series Spencer and Locke, as well as many projects for different publishers such as Marvel, where he did Savage Avengers. He wrote a Venom miniseries. He's written some Marvel Unlimited content, and now he's writing some awesome IP work with Dynamite, where he's writing Space Ghost. He just finished up Captain Planet, and now he's also writing Speed Racer for Mad Cave Studios. I had the honor of sitting down with him once again and sort of catching up, talking about all the work he's done over the years, and finding the vibe. That is the theme of this episode, finding the vibe of just finding where you fit into the larger landscape of comic books and finding different narratives that interest you. It doesn't always just have to be just like superhero comic books. It can be different types of comic books, whether it be horror, whether it be like just a racing story. It can be anything. And finding your vibe is where more people need to find themselves, because we feel as if comic books are only a medium for just capes and cowls, but it's so much more. So get excited and enjoy this episode as well as your normal episode for the week. But thank you so much for being on this show. Like, you've been kicking butt when it comes to talking about stuff over the past few years. Like, you've gone everywhere from your own stuff to then Marvel to then diving into back into sort of in your wheelhouse when it comes to sort of reinventing the wheel when it comes to existing properties. But you actually do get to play with those IPs now. Like, what is it like just having the ability to dive into so many different avenues with so many different publishers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been a real gift. For me, I tend to get restless easy, and so that's why I think I've always kind of bounced around between different genres and different tones over the course of my career. And I think for me, as somebody who always likes to inject pop culture stuff into my, that DNA into my work,
Right.
I think that's maybe primed me for sort of this licensed mode that I've found myself in lately, whether it's working on stuff at Marvel or whether it's working on like Space Ghost and Captain Planet over at Dynamite or Speed Racer over at Mad Cave. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the great joy of being a comic book creator is that you're able, I think, kind of chart your own course. You really like this is not an easy job, and certainly not necessarily a high paying one. And so it's one of those things that like you do it because you love it. And um,
Right.
I think the books that I think it's a fallacy that a lot of people I see sometimes say, oh, well, they took that book for the paycheck. And not to say that that's impossible, but I do think that like
Hmm.
if anything, it's a mistake. I don't think many people do that.
Right.
I think people do these books because they love them, because otherwise, like, it's 10 times harder to write something that you don't feel passionate about, that you're sort of like you're
Yeah.
forcing yourself to do that just as much as, the readers are forcing themselves to read it. So I do think that, like, for me, what's been so great is that I do think that over the course of my career, I really have been able to kind of like stay true to myself and to really kind of
Hmm.
like focus on the things that I like to read or watch or view or experience. And so, for me, I think that's what's made it so fun and so interesting and so varied, is there's a lot of pop culture out there. There's a lot of different
Yeah.
kind of genres out there. And, for me, it's always been, about like whether I can succeed or whether I fail. My job is to do it loudly, as loud as possible, as big of a swing as possible. And so I feel very fortunate and that I've had so many publishers who've been willing to give me a shot on so many
Yeah.
different properties. And yeah, and then I'm just trying to do them all justice.
That's very fair. And like, obviously, this is a brand new like show for a lot of individuals.
Sure.
But like, obviously, the idea of you had to start somewhere. So, what is the origin for like the new listeners? Like, what got you into picking up a pen for the first time and like creating your own story? Because you didn't like say, "Oh, I'm gonna go to DC, I'm gonna go to Marvel." When you started off, you found like a super small publisher that I don't even think Action Lab is around anymore. But
Now,
like, you created your own like universe off of a spin of Calvin and Hobbes, and like what made you go in that direction, and what made you pick up a pen for the first time?
yeah, well, it took me a long time to kind of give myself permission. And it's funny that you say, I didn't start at Marvel and DC, because actually that's not true.
Oh.
My when I was in college, I thought I wanted to be a comic book editor, and so I interned at
Oh.
DC in college. That was my very first job in the industry. I worked on
Okay.
books like Batman R.I.P. and Final Crisis and Green Lantern: Secret Origin, and it was a wonderful learning experience. But it was also during the '08 recession, so there were no
Yeah, that's
jobs to
fair.
be had.
Yeah.
And so I wound up working in comics journalism for a long time, and then my day job was working as a newspaper reporter. And I think for me, it took me a long time to give myself permission to be a comics writer, and even then, I feel like I kind of fell into it a little bit on accident.
Oh.
Like I said, I thought I wanted to be an editor for a really long time, and I moved to Los Angeles thinking that like something in that kind of sphere, whether it was as an editor or working in television or film and like development or current programming. Like I thought that was sort of the structure with sort of the creative itch
Mm.
that I was looking to satisfy. And then I quickly realized that a lot of those jobs they're so admin focused. It's so
Yeah.
much sort of it's really less creative elements than you might expect. It's a lot more of sort of being the traffic cop. It's a lot more of like making sure the thing
Can
is
you
done.
do this
Can you
rather
do the
than
thing
like
on
can like
time,
go,
on budget?
yeah.
And that's the hardest part of any creator-owned book for me. I hate that role. Like I've done it, but it's not something I particularly relish. Um, but what wound up happening was I was working my day job at the time. I worked in corporate communications over at
Mm.
CBS, and
Wow.
I wanted to do something more creative. I was planning on moving out west to try to pursue that. And at the time, I thought, like I love comics. Like, if I want to be a comics editor, um, or potentially even be a comics editor, what if I made a comic just to show that
Mm.
I knew how like all the moving parts and I figured that way, whatever job I wanted to do, I could prove that I could break down a story.
It's one of those like show your work kind of things. Like, yeah, you've
Yeah,
done editing behind the scenes, but
yeah.
like, can you show that you know what you're doing, kind of thing.
Exactly. And so, I had written short scripts, kind of to train myself to do all this, and then I had written like a couple of screenplays, like also just to kind of like train myself how to do this. And finally, I was like, okay, I want to do something a little more long form, and so I wrote the first issue of Spencer and Locke, my first book, and I was like, oh, that was fun. I really like that. Let me try to find an artist, just kind of see how that feels. And I found George Santiago Jr. and I had already known my letterer Colin Bell through my comics journalism days, and my friend Taylor Esposito. Sorry, my puppy's scratching in the background. Um, uh, my friend Taylor Esposito introduced me to the late Jason Smith, our colorist, and so I was like, oh, we'll put some pitch pages together, just kind of see how that goes. And those pitch pages turned out beautifully. And so I was like, okay, like maybe I'll just like pitch it, just to like say
Hmm.
that I did it, like, it'd be nice to kind of like learn the ropes a little bit.
Right.
And so I pitched it all over town, and Dave Dwanch, who was then the submissions editor at Action Lab Entertainment, um, emailed me back like 20 minutes after I sent my pitch, asking, how soon do you think you could get this book done? And I felt this like chill go up my spine, that I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to like finish this book now. And
Hmm.
so
It's like put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing.
yeah, and even then, I moved out west. We were putting the book together, and I was working a particularly punishing day job as a Hollywood assistant. I
Ooh.
was, I, it wasn't a good fit, it was kind of one of those jobs that like I was a part-time assistant for like 8 people. And so, I feel like that's like, you're kind of set
Wow.
up to fail for that sort of thing.
Yeah, that sounds stressful as all hell.
And so, I was commuting an hour and a half each way to do that. And, I was kind of getting beaten up in my job. And then suddenly, we're getting good reviews in like IGN and stuff for,
Hmm.
for for Spencer and Locke, and that's when I finally that was the light bulb moment. Like as somebody who like grew up in the Midwest, I didn't really have like creative role models. It felt like you might as well have been an astronaut.
Hmm.
And then I realized like, but people like this, and
Right.
maybe I could just kind of maybe I've been putting the cart before the horse the whole time. Maybe I could just do
Hmm.
this. And so, yeah, so I wound up writing a sequel to that, and then writing a book called Going to the Chapel. And that got me.
That was a fun book. I remember getting the review copy from that, and that was just like you never expected that to be a fun book.
Yeah, and that kind of got me a little bit of an on ramp to Aftershock Comics, where my old intern supervisor Mike Martz had gone to,
Mm.
and so that got me a book called Scout's Honor, and that got me on Marvel's radar, and then everything has sort of kind of gone through that since. I wound up writing a bunch of books at Marvel, Savage Avengers, Moon Knight, City of the Dead.
Yes,
Uh,
that book I remember. Like the show had just ended, but I was still picking books up,
yeah,
and I saw the cover, and I already read a couple issues because of like Jerry Dugan writing
yeah,
that before. But then I saw your name on it, and then I saw the lineup, and I was confused. Like how the transition for some of those characters, and then Conan getting like moving the license over to that. What is that like? Because
yeah.
not only are you playing with Marvel's toys, you're playing with like legacy IP toys, like Arnold
Yeah.
Schwarzenegger level toys. Like, what was that like? Getting the permissions and the ideas for that?
Sure, it was daunting, to be sure. I had been in contact with my editor Tom Brevoort ever since my first book came out,
Mm.
because Marvel is it's the top of the top. It's the majors,
Hmm.
and I really respected Tom for kind of his level of experience and expertise, and just the fact that he had, is such a senior part of the Marvel leadership team. And he was one of the few editors who really took the time to be like, like he would actually respond, and be like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, send me your stuff. And I remember I remember him giving me a hard time for being a reviewer at one point, that he's like, I know your name and I don't know most reviewers' names, and so you're gonna have to work
That's
twice as hard.
insane.
He told me he's like, good enough is not going to be good enough for you. You're going to have to make sure that you can really like deliver the goods if
Oh
you want to do in
wow.
this. And I really admired that. I really appreciated that, because like I want that honesty, and also yes, I want to kind of push myself. I want to strive for excellence.
Hmm.
And and I remember telling him, like, if you ever see any way for me to level up my game, I hope you'll be honest and let me know. Like, I want you to hold my feet to the fire. And
Right.
that I think that exchange is what got him to hire me. But yeah, it's one of those things. When he reached out, he said, "We're relaunching Savage Avengers, and do you have any ideas?" Um, at first I kind of had this moment of like, "Wait, what? Like, why? Like, why me? Why on this book?" And then I realized it's because it's Marvel's mashup book. Like
Yeah.
it's Conan plus Marvel characters. And so, it's funny. I had a creator-owned idea in my back pocket for a long time, that it was supposed to be Conan versus the Terminator. This idea of
Oh.
sort of two of Arnold's most iconic characters, squaring off against each other. And I'd written it as a licensed pitch for Dark Horse, and then the week I finished it, Marvel announced they had the rights to Conan. I was like, well, it's either
Dang.
going to be a creator-owned thing, or I'm never going to see it happen. But it was this
Hmm.
idea of Conan being hunted across the Hyborian Age by a Terminator, and
Oh wow.
discovering that like he's like a great, 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 great ancestor to John Connor. And so when they pitched me Savage Avengers, I was like, could we do Conan versus the Terminator, but like with a Deathlock? And they, I think Tom emailed me in like 45 minutes, and he was like, "That's a neat idea. Like, yeah, let's run with that." And so,
Hmm.
there was a lot of negotiation in terms of like which characters we were going to use. I wanted to speak to Jerry's original lineup of Savage Avengers,
Right.
not full on repeat it, and also, it's sort of a little bit of a Defenders vibe, in terms of like
Yeah.
my cast of misfit toys, that I think they really do kind of have some certain common threads as sort of these loners, berserkers, and killers. But working, Conan, it was definitely like a little daunting, but I think it was like kind of the perfect way to sort of build up my licensed career, which I think I'm enjoying
Hmm.
now, which is like, it's different than just working on just Marvel characters. Marvel characters,
Hmm.
I do think that like, Marvel is often, they're very open to kind of like trying new things with the characters. I think the 20 questions you wind up playing at a place like Marvel is really just like which characters are available at any particular
Right.
moment.
Like what toys in the toy box are allowed you for you to mess with.
Yeah, both in terms of heroes, especially in a team book, but also villains in
Hmm.
particular. Um, but working with Conan was kind of an extra challenge, because when you're working with a licensor, and that's their job, is, they've got very certain ideas of what the characters are supposed to be. They really do not want you to color too much out of the lines in terms of like what this character
Yeah.
is. And they've got their own sort of internal continuity that they will be very they want you to know it,
Yeah.
and they will sort of really kind of be hands on if they want to correct anything with that. And so for me, it wasn't so much that I grew up with like a huge abiding passion for Conan. Like, I mean, I watched the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies,
Of course, yeah.
but it's one of those things that I was just like, oh, it's the mashup book, it's Sword and Sorcery Terminator. Like, that's cool. I can do something with that. And
You had a
so
really awesome opportunity with that too, because like you have a ragtag group of people, because like you have Weapon H, like you have Cloak and Dagger, which that's
yeah,
a battle in its own right, where C and D have risen to popularity with Marvel rivals. You're one of the few people that can say you've been able to write C and D and give them a voice, whereas like they haven't really had that many solo titles.
no, I'm a huge fan of Cloak and Dagger. Ever since Matt Fraction did the Dark X-Men Utopia over in Dark
Yes,
Reign.
I have those books signed by Jai Lee in my back issue bin.
Yeah, that I was like, as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, Cloak and Dagger, of course they should be A-listers. Of course, those are the
Hmm.
exact sort of characters that should be Avengers. And so that's something I'd been lobbying. I mean, when I would write my fan fiction, when I was trying to teach myself how to write, and I was writing Avengers fan fiction, Cloak and Dagger and Daredevil were on the team.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, it was funny, like 10 years later, like I'm writing an Avengers book where Cloak and Dagger and Daredevil are on the team.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love that book. I mean, I look back on it and there's certainly things I would do differently just because, like, now as a more seasoned writer,
Right, yeah.
there's
One of your
little.
first cracks at the job, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I learned that was actually a big learning experience in terms of like you can write the same thing in multiple books, but like just based on like your collaborators, they won't always turn out in the exact same way. And
That's fair.
not just in terms of the art. I mean, I loved working with Carlos Magno. He's a sensational artist and wildly underrated. He should be on like a flagship book now. I think it's also like, different letterers, like
Hmm.
will make your work look different in different ways. And so, I probably would have written less, I think is the only thing I would have done
Okay.
differently on that book is just, like, letting the art do more of the talking. But it was my first Marvel book and I was excited and I wanted to kind of throw
Hmm.
everything in the kitchen sink at it. And so that's a book that, even if there's like a couple warts that I notice, I feel like most people don't. And I loved kind of the ambition and the enthusiasm. You can see it
Of
on every
course,
page.
yeah.
Sense of scale. I like I said before, like I was like, if I succeed or fail, I want to do it loud. Uh,
Most definitely. And like one thing that you have the like like perspective of for like different people is you saw or at least were approaching the book right as Elektra became Daredevil. So
yeah,
like you have that ability to say you kind of have to bounce between Chip Zdarsky and yourself and know, okay, what can you do with Elektra while also coloring in the lines, not just for Conan
yeah,
but other characters, because C and D kind of have that ability to be free form and have like more to do with. But then you have Weapon H and you have Anti Venom, but then you also have that little bit with Elektra where it's like, can I do this?
yeah. I mean, I think for that, I had written Savage Avengers to kind of be, the time travel element was a real help for us because it made everything feel like a bottle episode. That like,
Yeah,
where does it fit in the continuity of like what Chip's doing or Chip was doing in Daredevil, or where does the continuity fit in terms of like what Black Knight was up to in that particular moment in Marvel
yeah.
history, or where was Flash Thompson? Like you could just say like it happens anywhere you want it to because they're in a time travel thing, but they're going to be dropped back off exactly where you need.
Right. It's very hand wavy, kind of like almost like Legends of Tomorrow in that way.
Yeah, 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 very much so. And so, like for that, I mean, I was reading those books, as they were coming out. So like I was very much like, I was on board. I knew exactly kind of like the vibe
Yeah.
of what Chip was doing. And so, I think I just, tried to kind of honor that as best I could. Like I don't want to break any of these characters. I don't
Of
want to
course,
do anything
yeah.
that's like wildly out of character. Um I
You
think
don't want
that
to pull like a Bendis and just off Hulk in the middle of an event while like someone else is writing him.
yeah, I think the trickiest part, honestly, well, not I wouldn't say tricky. There was like a 2 weeks. I found out after like my like I think I had turned in issue 2, and it was my first Marvel book, so I had no idea sort of what the procedure was. And I didn't hear anything back for a minute. And I didn't
Okay.
realize at the time that's not at all Tom Brevoort's mode. He's very good at responding to things very, very quickly. And that the reason I didn't find out about anything is because behind the scenes, that's when like everything was going on with the Conan license. And I think
Mhm.
I think it came a little out of nowhere, on at least in certain corners, certainly for me. And so there was like a week and a half where like we weren't sure if we were gonna have Conan at all. Like,
Oh.
was I gonna kind of have to start from scratch? And thankfully, like everybody kind of put heads together, and like they figured out sort of this final extension for the license. But I was told kind of by then, like in no uncertain terms, like you have to have Conan out by issue 8, and
Okay.
I knew that we were breaking this up into 5 issue arcs, and so I was like, that's fine. Like the way I had written an escape hatch for Conan in my initial outline that I was just like,
Okay.
we're bringing him back to the Hyborian age. It's easy to just leave him there, you
Yep.
know. And so that's what we wound up doing. But I, I do remember it was a stressful like week and a half, 2 weeks where like I was like frantically trying to come up with other ideas that would be as good as this. And so thankfully, like everybody, everything worked out in the end.
Okay.
Like I have to thank Jason Aaron for that one because I think King Conan, I'm sure, is a big reason why that happened.
Most
Uh,
definitely, yeah.
but yeah, it was nice. Like getting to write Conan's last story in the Marvel universe, I think makes Savage Avengers such a unique and I think important piece in Marvel lore. Is that
Right,
you
yeah.
know I I found out I think it was like I think I was in the middle of writing issue 4 when it occurred to me that there were no other Conan comics coming. And I remember
Oh.
emailing Tom and being like, "Is this the last Marvel comic that Conan's going to be in?" And he was like, "Huh, yeah, I guess so." So that ending in Savage Avengers 5 was
You
like,
get to be the one to help him walk out the door in that way.
yeah, and so we really wanted to make it like a big iconic moment, and so King Conan sitting in his throne, but there's that Avengers, that tattered Avengers flag in the background.
Right, yeah.
For me, it was sort of my way of kind of showing that it all mattered. It all counts. It's still
Yeah.
an important part of like
It's
Conan.
kind of like when Transformers and ROM stop in back in the 80s and 90s. Like you still have that little bit of touchstone, but it's not like it was forgotten.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of the thing was like I know there's going to be like a change in continuity because they wound up going to Titan, and but just like the fact that like that one image that Carlos Magno drew so beautifully was just showing that like in the course of like Conan the Barbarian's kind of like storied tapestry,
Mm.
this is a chapter and it matters and it was important.
Right, yeah.
Um,
Like that's kind of the cool thing about that is that like you can say that you've touched a big license like that. Like I've
yeah,
even seen them trying to bring in Godzilla right now, and that's been a big talking point. Or
yeah,
like at New York Comic Con, you saw Godzilla like versus Black Bolt, and it's
yeah.
like who like that team has to have a similar journey where like you where they don't know how much time they have left.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I'm not privy to like the intricacies of that particular license. Although I've been told that Toho is really cool to work for. I ran into
Okay.
Jerry at New York Comic Con this past week, and it was I've known Jerry for a few years now, and he's a lovely guy. And um, but I think his Godzilla versus the Marvel Universe is like my favorite thing he's written by a country mile for a long time. And I think that's because it's a book that understands the assignment. It's
Most
really like
definitely.
it's a fun book. Like I like and fun. I mean that specifically, in that it's funny and it's over the
Right,
top.
like it lets you just do fun things without worrying about continuity. Like you're
Yeah,
just gonna. It's kind of like how Deadpool versus the Marvel Universe, where like we're just doing the thing. Like just go with it.
yeah, and I feel like that book, like it's a genuine joy. It's a genuine hoot and holler. And so yeah, I think playing with these big licenses. I mean, I think I'm lucky in that I didn't grow up with many of the licenses. I think I grew up as like a '90s kid. But as I've gotten older, like I could kind of look back on these things with appreciation, and I think
Yeah,
a part of my style a little bit, is that like for me, I don't mind kitsch, like
yeah.
I see that as sometimes a feature, not a bug. And so that's why like I like 80s and 90s action movies, and so
Oh, for sure.
so I think because I've grown into appreciating these things as an adult rather than sort of growing up as a kid and marinating in that emotionally, it
Yeah.
gives me like just the right amount of distance that I can kind of like.
You can dip in and out. It's kind of like I kind of fit in that same mold, like how Boomerang was. Like, well, that's what I was gonna get to when we got to the Dynamite stuff. Is like you are kind of like opening the Boomerang door,
Yeah.
and you can it's like step into those shows like at your leisure, and then it's like, okay, cool, we'll change the channel now and go do something else.
Well, I think for me, it's all about like, can you look at the property dispassionately enough that you can figure out what the bones of it are, that you can figure out
Right.
like this is why this thing endures. And then once you've sort of locked in on those qualities and you've figured out all the continuity landmarks, or the
Yeah.
mythology landmarks that you can kind of introduce, incorporate, then it becomes like, you the joy and the emotional connection then comes from your take. Where it's
Exactly.
like,
Yeah.
for example, like Space Ghost, for example, like I did not grow up. I mean, I saw Coast to Coast, and I saw.
Of course, yeah. No,
Yeah.
that was one thing I was going to even touch on, is that like you may have seen the goofier side,
Yeah.
but then you even kind of like do a mature Adam West in some ways with him, where you're like he has that nobility,
Yeah.
but it's still like this tells a mature story.
Yeah, I think when Dynamite approached me for that book, I at first like I wasn't sure. I kind of bounced the idea off a couple friends of mine who were a little older than me, and I was like, do you think I should take this book? I'm like, I'm not sure. And they were like, no, you should definitely take the book. Well, they were like, it was like rooted and is inspired by Adam West Batman, right? And
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time, and so I was like, huh. Immediately the gears started turning where I was like, if it's directly inspired by Batman, and that's a character who's varied so much tonally over the years and been reinvented
Hmm.
in so many different ways, I was like, oh, well then you could reinvent Space Ghost in
Yeah.
tonally. And as I watched the cartoons, I realized like, oh, this is in a lot of ways, it's almost like at least on paper, it's a perfected Batman because you've got
Yeah.
like the cool vigilante stuff with like all the villains and the gadgets and the sidekicks, but it's also in this elevated sci-fi realm, so you can really kind of like do
You
all
can
sorts.
bend a little bit and do different things.
Yeah,
Like you even have like the races of aliens, and I got
yeah.
one of the lines of one of the recent issues. They're like, "Oh, an ice villain. We have every flavor of thing going on."
Yeah. That was sort of my little meta joke of because Space Ghost really like so many stories fit organically on his shoulders. He really is like
Yeah,
one of those characters that he can do anything, and you can put him in something a little more street level. You can do something that's like world shaking and bombastic, and it all fits. But as I watched the cartoon, I was like, oh, like I can see the bones very clearly. Like this is about Jan and
yeah,
Jace. Like they're the POV characters. They're sort of like the Kitty Pryde to Claremont's X-Men. Um,
yeah.
and I don't know if focus group testing was a thing back then. There's so much history about the original Space Ghost cartoon that was never recorded because like back then, like who was
They
the
were just going to sled seat their
cartoons.
pants and just going for it.
Yeah, there's whatever, there weren't like credits on anything, Um,
Yeah,
but I think for me it's like, oh, you have Jan and Jace, so you've got like whether you're a young boy or a young girl, you can sort of like imprint yourself on Space Coast, and then they've got
yeah. You can identify with that. Yeah,
because monkeys would make Silver Age books, they would give them a sales bump. I
yep.
was like, that's so smart. And so, that kind of became, I think, like the crux of like, emotionally of Space Ghost is it's a found family, story similar to, Savage Avengers in that regard. But I think if anything, it's sort of a little more perfected, this idea of a
Yeah.
widower and two orphans kind of like coming together and making something, healing each other's wounds.
Right,
Um,
like one line that I even noticed in the recent issue was that like the one like person's like, "Oh, are you their father?" It's like I like to think of me as them,
yeah,
but like it's a different dynamic in that way.
yeah, like and so yeah, I think that is what has made me fall in love with Space Ghost. And of course, like knowing that, like, as you're watching all the cartoons, you see all the ingredients that you get to kind of cook with. And I think that's what I like most about working in these nostalgia books, whether it's Space Ghost or Captain Planet or Speed Racer, is that and I say this as somebody who loves superheroes. I want to put this out there. I love superheroes. I love Marvel. I love DC. I grew up with all of them. I love writing for them. Um, my theory is, I think a problem that we have in the industry that I don't know how to solve is those shared universes now, they've become so mainstream and we've dug
Yeah.
into them so deeply that I think a lot of fans, and God love them, we love their passion and their dedication. Um, I think they have started to try to anticipate stories rather than necessarily
Yeah.
present with them. And so that becomes a lose-lose, because what winds up happening is either the fans successfully anticipate the story and then they say, well, why is this thing so predictable? And that, or they don't predict it, it's something that goes against the grain, and that opens people up to saying, well, that doesn't feel right, that's not how that character would act.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. And
And
I'm even kind of worried about that with recent titles too, because like one thing that I love that you got to do is like even if it was only a short run, you got to do a new Punisher. And
yeah,
it's like I love the idea of progressing the Marvel and DC timelines and telling new stories, but it feels like the publishers and some of the fans are scared to push that a little bit. They're like they don't want to see time progress, but they're so quick to give us a new legacy hero. And it's like, don't you want to move the timeline a little bit, like just
well,
a little bit?
boy, it's tough because there's so many different moving parts to something like that. Where it's like, I do think it starts with the fans, because I feel like if the fans don't accept it, then I understand why a publisher might just be like, we can't do it. And I
Yeah.
think for us, for Punisher, I had only been contracted to write that miniseries, and we had talked kind of like in very preliminary terms about, like, what would we do if we kind of turn this thing into an ongoing. And then those discussions kind of became a moot point very quickly, because my editor, Tom Brevoort, was tapped to take over X-Men. And so suddenly Punisher, which was this thing that he and I worked very closely together on, he couldn't edit the book anymore.
Right.
And so then it went to a different office who, they had their own stuff that they were working on at the moment, so Punisher couldn't really be a priority. And also,
Okay.
I totally understand, like, a different editor might want to do different things with the book, and, like, you can't fault them for that.
Yeah.
But so that sometimes that happens. That it was sort of a short thing, and I look back on it in the end that it all worked out, because, like, I
Oh,
think
for sure.
I think that Punisher book got me Space Ghost, and I think I took a lot of the energy and things that I was thinking, if we extended this book, here's what I'd do. I wound up
Mhm.
bringing all that energy to Space Ghost, and so it wound up working. But I think, I don't know. I genuinely don't, at least in my experience at Marvel, like, I do think that, like, the editors are actually very willing to try, like, big swings and new things. I think that the question is whether or not fans will support it.
Will it sell and things of that nature?
Yeah, just because, like, I do think we're in a state right now where, like, the market has shrunk. And
Hmm.
so that means that, like, it used to be, you could get 1 million people buying Spider-Man or whatever X-Men title, and that would kind
Of
of
course.
that would subsidize kind of the lower selling books. And now I think, because the market is kind of shrunk,
It's always a gamble kind of thing.
there's less buffer for the sort of, like, lower selling critical darlings,
Hmm.
because even the big books are not bringing in enough that they can subsidize, like, 1 million lower selling books. And
Yeah.
so I get it. That's why, like, I think longer runs are sort of becoming harder and harder to come by. Um, and that's why I give credit to the publishers who are willing to give those. I mean,
Hmm.
that's why I took on Space Ghost, is because when they offered it to me, they said, we'll give you a year. And same thing with Speed Racer. They said, how about a 15 issue run? And for me, that's something I love, writing miniseries, of course, but I
Hmm.
do think the market has shifted away from them in a certain way. I think maybe a big misnomer that we have as creators is that I like writing my books kind of standalone, as books,
Right.
or or view it as like a movie. I
You
think
want to give someone something digestible where like you could buy a trade and it just be a trade in that essence, not like, oh, buy the next trade in a month or two
But I
kind of
think
thing.
I think it's tough, because I think the Wednesday Warriors, I don't think, see it that way anymore. I
Yeah.
think I think for them, it's has more in common with TV viewing, where like, every week, or in this case every month, you want to have your check in with those characters you like, and
For
the
sure.
things that you like them to do, And so that's sort of the approach I kind of rolled the dice on with Space Ghost is like, let's do these done in ones. Let's do these done in twos. Like, let's keep this that, you're seeing the words the end, or you're feeling that ending of the end again and
Or
again
like
and
next
again. And
time on Space Ghost kind of
yeah,
thing.
finishing a story builds that investment and that
For
emotional
sure.
engagement. And I think the industry has sort of, at least from what I've been hearing from readers, they've moved away from this sort of like, here's a 5-part storyline, written for the trade.
Uh-huh.
Now they're very much like, we want to get our money's worth every single month. We want that sense of completion. And
Well, yeah, especially because like the average single issue is like $4.99 now, so definitely
yeah,
like that's kind of been the battle that I've seen, especially on TikTok, where like the trade holds more value because of the fact that like every book is an investment. That's
yeah,
why it's kind of been a battle when it comes to like the value of the digital apps, because people wonder, does DC or does Marvel see those apps and wonder if though like there's longevity to a book if it's bred on the app. That was kind of like what I was
yeah,
going to lead my next question with you is like, when you have an opportunity to write like Avengers Unlimited for Marvel Unlimited,
yeah.
and it's like when you have a perspective that not everyone has, does Marvel and like obviously like you can't get the perspective for DC, but does Marvel hold weight to the app because you have fans in other countries who can't be Wednesday Warriors, who can't pre-order a trade and hope that a series will go on. Does Marvel hold weight to the app?
I can't speak. I don't know for, because I
Uh-huh.
feel like that's a question that's above my pay grade, and I don't know. I really don't even know sort of what Marvel's kind of aims and goals are currently for Unlimited as it is.
Right.
I I personally, and maybe I have it wrong, and Marvel could certainly contradict me on this one, but I personally, I don't think it really has much of an impact on like keeping a book alive.
Okay.
I worry that that's kind of like a misconception that a lot of people have, is that they're like, oh, well, I've subscribed to Marvel Unlimited, and
Yeah.
and I've checked out this book. But I think the problem is that, first off, the books come out late enough now on Marvel
Hmm.
Unlimited that like the window's kind of already gone. But second,
Right.
I would imagine just the finances on all this, that like if you're paying like, I don't know what the yearly subscription is, like what, 70 a year now or something like
Something like
that.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, like, again, like if you're reading like 100 books, or if
Mm.
you're reading like significant numbers per month, like after a while, like the amount of money that's actually coming back to Marvel on
Does
all
it
that.
really hold value in that
Yeah, it's like
aspect?
pennies on
Yeah.
the dollar. And so, it's one of those things, like I think it's double edged, and honestly, maybe that's my toxic trait, is that like I worry that, I know there's that thought is like, oh, is Unlimited maybe heading off digital piracy?
Mm.
But I'm not convinced that it does. And
That
honestly,
makes total sense.
honestly, my
I
worry my worry about the subscription services, and I completely understand from a consumer standpoint why somebody would do that.
mm.
Like, but I think from a business standpoint, I worry that the same worries that people had when trade paperbacks became mainstream, that we were going to
Mm.
train
Yeah.
readers not to pick up single issues. At least the trade paperbacks, you could say, well, like you're still bringing in a decent percentage of the
For
money for
sure.
that, and it's a long tail operation. Like in theory, it's
Yeah.
supposed to be back catalog. It's supposed to be, I'm always thinking about like Long Halloween, or like Death and Return of
Mm.
Superman, or Kingdom
The
Come.
Omnibuy that like fills shelves to this day that like
Yeah,
hold value to some people.
yeah, and like even just like, the trades that I've done, like I'm like I still sell Spencer and Locke, like
Mm.
um my worry about the digital apps is that we are training like a whole generation of fans, um to not pick up the singles, to not pick up the trades. And I think that the whatever kind of pennies that we're scraping up from those, I don't think are enough to sustain any particular title. It's not to
Yeah.
say, like, I mean, I've heard of certain books, kind of coming back from the brink, like Miss Marvel or something like that, for example.
Yeah.
Or, like, um,
a perfect example, like I like said this on like multiple episodes of the show now, like the success of seeing a trade like Black Panther sell out because of the movie, that was a like a catch 22 where you saw that work, but then nobody bought the extender books. Like you
Right.
saw World of Wakanda, and you saw Black Panther and the Crew have some of the lowest pre-orders in history because of that. So it really is a double-edged sword in that aspect.
Yeah, but like you see, like every once in a blue moon, you'll have a book like Miss Marvel, or I remember, I think it was Astonishing Iceman was the title, one of the
I
Iceman.
think it was, yeah, because
Yeah,
yeah,
it's the Cena Grace Iceman book. Like those occasionally, or they talk all the time about the old Spider Girl book that like saved itself from
yeah.
cancellation. But I do think that I think at the end of the day, you still have to buy the book. And I know that's tough because I feel like for international readers, exactly what you said. Like, I would much rather those international readers, at least give something to the publisher,
Of course.
to justify reading it rather than just like outright pirating it. And I'm a big believer in like, if you don't have a local comic shop, but you have a library who you can request this stuff through, that's also super helpful. But yeah, I don't, again, this is sort of one man's just kind of like uninformed opinion, so I could have this totally wrong, but I don't think the app will save a book by any means.
Fair. And I mean, like, what is the process like though for the unlimited exclusives? Like
Yeah,
Jeff blew up, like Jeff the Landshark blew up because of Marvel Unlimited to where he got the notoriety to be in a video game. So
yeah,
it's like, but then at the same time, you're telling smaller, digestible stories. I've seen this sort of like scroll method
sure.
with it like DC Infinite Marvel Unlimited, where they're trying to appeal to the younger generation, but then it also is a concerning idea with the younger generation that it could like affect the single issues. So
Yeah.
what is that process like?
Well, I mean, for me, it was, because I've written a few things on Unlimited. I wrote 2 arcs of Avengers Unlimited, and I wrote a one-off Spider-Verse Unlimited. And for me, a lot of it was just sort of like, how do you write these stories in a way that like still kind of fits in whatever continuity, the greater continuity is going on, but like can kind of carve out its own little niche and not
Yeah.
necessarily like step on or contradict like the main book's toes. And so, that is very similar to like anything you're doing in a print mainstream comic.
Okay.
I think the difference for me is it's the form, like it's really like you have to kind of tell your stories in, I think, an accelerated time frame. You have to really
Hmm.
be, I think, very direct with the storytelling because you don't have the room to be kind of like doing like a lot of flashbacks, to be doing, internal narration. You want to keep the things accessible. And for me, I wanted to
Hmm.
make sure that every chapter kind of like felt like a self-contained standalone thing, that sort of built to a bigger whole. And I guess as we're talking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that was probably really good training for like what I did on Space Ghost later.
Yeah.
So I think it's writing for the format. It's sort of how can you leverage that in a certain way. Um, I think having it be shorter, like I think each story was something like what 40 panels or something like that.
Yeah.
The equivalent of like 8 to 10 normal pages, and so like
You're like cutting a single issue in half and then like extending it up a sheet in a way to
yeah,
like make it digestible like for a modern audience.
yeah. So like I think I after a while I kind of learned how to like really get that out in a fast clip. Like there were some of those Marvel Unlimited scripts that I was like banging out in like 2 days, and I felt really
Hmm.
good about them. Like I don't feel like I was like cutting corners or anything. Um, so yeah, I mean, I love those things. I don't know. I don't know what Marvel's plans are for the Marvel Unlimited side of things because I know that like Avengers Academy, for example, just wrapped up, and I don't know what is on the app right now. Like
Right.
I don't know if they're continuing to do sort of these unlimited exclusives or not. Um, I know they were doing them for X-Men. I don't know
Hmm.
if they've continued with them or not, but like I know, they just printed a couple of Alex Packnadels, things with that. So, I think, look, it's one of those things that like I think it's great to have stuff for that kind of audience, and I know like they're
Hmm.
breaking stuff on Webtoon, and I don't know if they're going to ever put Avengers Unlimited on Webtoon, but I really hope they do because that would be
Yeah.
awesome. So yeah, I mean, it's a different type of storytelling. It's really fun, and I think it's a nice muscle group to have developed. And it was for me really nice because it let me play with like some of my favorite toys in all of the Marvel universe. Like I can die happy knowing that I've written Spider-Man in the Avengers and that it was canon.
Right, like that ability that you can say you've written Black Panther meant something to me because
Yeah,
it shows that you're able to do a variety of things, and you even kind of like had the tone right, where it's
thank
like
you.
you have an act for being able to flex, and I even kind of noticed this with Captain Planet, where
Yeah,
you are very comfortable telling different perspectives versus other writers, like there's almost like the Bendis effect, where everybody sounds like Tony Stark when they don't mean to sound like Tony Stark. Versus with you, like every one of the Planeteers felt like the OGs, but a little bit like different age variants. And it
sure.
was like I love that you did that. Like even Bati, I'm like, what did you do to Bati? Like it's a whole different dynamic with him, where he's like, yeah, no, I was like damn near an eco terrorist for a minute. We were going to blows, but then this ring changed my perspective, and I'm like, okay, this is
Yeah,
really cool the way you went about that.
you know,
Like that was the one that I really resonated with. Like I want to talk about all three of
sure.
your like newest titles, but like Captain Planet struck something with me in those first few issues where I'm like, he's doing something. And I don't know if it was like you gave Captain Planet a beard and it hooked me, but like you started to really do something with that.
Thank you. Captain Planet's it was a fun one because that book was my white whale for a very long time. I had been lobbying to write that book for like 10 years.
Really?
Yeah, like because I, you know, I always felt that Captain Planet kind of had all the building blocks for success, and I always thought it was
Yeah.
crazy that nobody had like really paid any attention to it. Because it's got that diverse international cast that's kind of like almost in the vein of like Giant Size X-Men.
Yeah.
And it's got like these really powerful timely themes of like environmentalism, but also sort of the unchecked greed and capitalism that kind of fuels these environmental climate disasters. And then I think the powers, I thought it came out before Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I feel like
Uh-huh.
in a post Avatar world you're like, oh wait, like you could do something really neat with that, something really
Uh-huh.
distinct. And so I had kind of the bones of that opening Captain Planet storyline in my head for a long time. Um, and uh, and so when Dynamite announced that they had gotten the rights to Captain Planet at San Diego last year, I marched over to my editor and publisher, and I had the press release on my phone, and I was like, "Is anybody writing this book? Because if not, you have to give it to me." I like demanded that
Why
book.
couldn't you do that with Ben 10 though? Like why did Joe Casey get it? I want it.
Well, Joe Casey got it because he co-created Ben 10. Uh,
That's fair. Like
well, that's
that's a hell of an honor, but it's like that always is a double edged sword though. When having a co-creator come in like that, like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
you know,
So it's like,
yeah, no, Joe deserves 100% first dibs on that character. I think, and I do think, I talked with somebody on Blue Sky about this actually the other day. Where they were saying, oh, I wish Captain Planet wasn't a reboot. I wish it was just like 30 years later and like Captain Planet like feeling sad about like, his message not being listened to. And I was like, listen, I
right,
understand that impulse, but I think 9 times out of 10 is the wrong impulse. The reason I do reboots is because I want
yeah,
readers to be able to discover the property. Because I think that if you're respectful of it and you're sort of tapping into the mythology of the originals, but doing your own spin on it, 99% of the time, the old veterans love it. They love
uh
that
huh,
you're sort of treating this childhood thing of theirs with respect, um,
most definitely.
and enough respect to say like we can modernize this, we can push this.
For sure, and like I don't know if you have any experience with Power Rangers, but like I feel like it would have been really a bad look to go that route because it would have had the kite effect from Power Rangers Wild Force, where like it just feels preachy rather than an underlying message. Because
Yeah,
that little kid was straight up like, "You're polluting the earth. I'm taking your Zords away." Versus
yeah,
like I feel like Captain Planet would have became that. Versus like even here, you're like, "Oh, I'm weak because like the earth's so much worse than what it used to be," and
sure.
like you didn't just take the easy out and like have Gaia be just asleep for 100 years or whatever. No, it's a mantle. You did
Yeah,
that such a great way with that, and it's very much he's waking up to a whole different world that he expected.
yeah. I think it's one of those things that like I think it's one thing if you want to do like a lost season of a TV show, as a nostalgia comic. The way that I do think it works is if you bring like the original creators on board.
Yeah.
I don't know if the Man of Action crew are doing a continuation of the series or if it's a reboot. I'm not.
I must say, I read the press release. It sounds like they're just rebooting it. It sounds like.
Yeah, it may be that may be the case. I'm not 100% sure what they're doing, but like, yeah, I think for me, for Captain Planet in particular, it was like, yeah, I didn't want to preach, and I was kind of hoping that my goal was kind of like if you tell the characters in the right way and you sort of convey this as like, I think environmentalism in 1989 was seen as largely hypothetical. Like we had the hole in the ozone
Yeah.
layer, we had acid rain, but like it was not as existential as I think it
As
should be.
now.
Because now it's not hypothetical; it's a disaster movie that we're all extras in. Like
Right, like I work. My day job is an HVAC, so like I'm seeing it unfold as like we're even in a dry spell right now where we thought ACs were going to be more profitable this year, but no, it's like the economy makes it even worse,
yeah,
and now we're just like trying to piece it apart to get through the seasons now.
yeah, like I live in Los Angeles, and so we had the wildfires early this year, and
Yeah.
I just got back from New York, and like there's this giant nor'easter that like kind of kept us on the tarmac for 5 hours,
Oh
and
wow.
and like my parents live in the Midwest. I lived in New York during Sandy, like
Uh.
climate change is like a thing. It is a thing that we're all living in, and so for me, kind of injecting that disaster movie element into the
Yeah.
superhero genre, it makes it feel very immediate. Like I think the misconception that a lot of people have about Captain Planet is that like everything has to be so overtly environmental and that the eco villains have to be like, I hate the environment, and I don't think that's the case. I think
Uh-huh.
what it is they don't hate the environment, they just don't care. They just
Right.
want
Exactly.
whatever's going to consolidate wealth and power and prestige and reputation for them. And for them, it's just like it's cutting corners. It's like,
Like you kind of nailed it in the first issue, where the it's almost like the Elon Musk of it all is
yeah,
like, bro, I don't care about your kids, I don't care about your superhero. I just want to control everything.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
all can burn for all I care. I just want my stuff now.
Yes, and I think that's sort of like the crux of it. And then I like this idea of like people from kind of all different walks of life from around the world. They all have their own different perspective on the environmental conversation. I mean, Kwame's a farmer, but also like
Yeah.
a forest fire took something very personal from him. It took away his dreams. It took away his career ambitions. It gave him a disability. Like, and at the same time, like
He almost lost his village in the first 5 minutes, and then you fixed that.
yeah, like it's one of those things that for him, like he's able to kind of stand up, like he's a born leader, and for him, like doing the right thing and saving the world, like feels very natural to him. Whereas like somebody like Wheeler, he's the skeptic. He's
Yo.
an auto worker from Detroit, and he's been
Mm,
told, oh, it's the green cars that are taking your job. It's not,
yeah.
not the CEOs. And so, for him, he's like, well, I think this mission is bull, and also like, even if it wasn't, like, why me? Like,
Right, like why do I matter in the grand scheme of things? Like you're like I have a friend who's basically just like Wheeler, and he doesn't view the bigger pictures, but it's like you are a part of this whether you like it or
yeah,
not.
yeah, or it's like Link is the opposite, where like she sees this through a political lens, and so she's very much like
And
she
she's an heiress; she has to cope with that.
Yeah, and I thought that was some nice little kind of like texture for her, is that like part of the reason why she's doubled down so much is because she feels guilty of where she comes from.
Yeah.
A little bit of rebellion against an absent dad. Whereas like Guy, she sees it through the science of it all.
Yes, that was such a great way to do her, where it's like you almost like Velma her, but in a better way, where she
Funny.
is thinking on an
Yeah,
intellectual scale, but appreciates even Kwame in a way where like he is the fallen tracks, like a soccer star, like he is that like that she views him idolization, but then follows him because of him being a natural leader.
yeah. It's funny. I've never heard of somebody describing it as Velming, but you're 100% right. That's so funny that like almost a year after I developed this story, I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. Um,
Well, it's like in the first 5 minutes, like when Kwame's like, "Oh, I love your bag," it's like, "Oh yeah, I'm a marine biologist. Like this is my stuff," and it's like that was such a great way to go about that with her.
I did it in part. It was for two reasons. Partially because, we needed a new heart of the team. Because like,
Yeah,
because Mati we kind of wanted to make him a little more mature, a little bit more brooding. I
Yes, I
didn't want him to be a
love that.
punchline, and people are like, "What's the power of heart?" And I'm like, "Oh, it's like this tactical telepathy that like, even though he's
Yeah,
a pacifist who's not going to hurt you physically, like he doesn't have to." Uh,
exactly.
and so I couldn't have like two stoic characters on there, and I feel like Guy in the original cartoon was a little more stoic. And also, like, when you're putting together a team, there are certain roles that you need filled. Like, you need your leader, you need your hothead, you need your sort of
Yeah,
actor, and you need your brainiac. You need somebody who can kind of like see the environment and be able to connect the dots for you, and also like deliver like key bits of exposition. So I knew I needed a scientist. Like Black Knight was my brains in Savage Avengers, for example.
yeah.
He became very helpful as the series progressed because he could be like, oh well, you could do the doodad with the doohickey and do the thing. So I needed a character like that, and I knew that Guy was a marine biologist in the original cartoon, and so
Yeah.
back in the cartoon, that was just her putting on a wetsuit and swimming with dolphins. But I feel like,
Right, yeah, like it was very like cosmetic. It wasn't like it
yeah,
actually mattered. But then in the first issue, you're like, oh, she's just saying how much water is flowing through New York. I'm gonna just rip it out. And it was
yeah,
very cool the way you did that.
yeah. So thank you. Like it was definitely, you know, she was the last one I cracked, Guy.
Okay. I
And then,
figure Mati would have been your last one. I feel like that would have been the one where you're sitting there for hours. Like, how do I not make him a joke?
that was
How do I actually do that right?
I thought about him for he was sort of actually I thought about him. I figured him out like 10 years ago. And and
Okay.
and and that was when I realized like this thing's viable is when I cracked Mati.
Yeah.
And I think for him just the idea that like he really is the confluence of like what Captain Planet is about, whereas this side of the coin that it's environmentalism but also capitalism fueling it, and he
Yeah.
is a direct victim of all of it. That it's like his land has been stolen and his water's been poisoned, and there's these people from this mining corporation that are like brutalizing his people.
Yup.
And he's like, I'm not gonna take it. And he was ready to like really kind of like do some stuff that he couldn't walk away from. And then this
Yeah.
ring kind of gives him a whole new perspective on life. And it's sort of one of those things that you're like, at least for me, you leave yourself thinking like, is there a little bit of a sinister edge to this? That like, did
Like,
this?
like, like it almost it's that one bad day talk that Joker always gives, where it's like one bad move could make everybody turn the wrong way, but you almost kind of flip it, where
Yeah.
it's that one thing saved him from doing like everything wrong.
Well, but at the same time, it's also like, is this Mati or is this the ring? And
Yeah.
and I that was something that I was always kind of playing with, at least when I that informed my voice for him a lot, is sort of this idea of like he's trying to turn things around, he's trying to make this second chance count, but also I think there's that little bit of doubt in him that he's like, yeah, but I wouldn't be doing this without the ring, would I? And
And you almost like have like the first couple issues, like Captain Planet's like a shadow to him,
yeah,
where it's like guiding him in a way like that we need him line. Like
yeah,
no, save. Like I thought that was such a cool way to articulate, or even when you show Captain Planet in like shackles, but
yeah,
like when he's not in like when he's not out with the rings, you're showing that like it's almost like you wonder what's in a Pokeball. Like what happens to the Pokemon in the Pokeball? What happens to Captain Planet when things aren't united in a way?
yeah. I That was my way of kind of circling the square of with Captain Planet, we couldn't do the done in one approach that we did with Space Ghost or we did with Speed
Right.
Racer because there's too many characters that are too scattered, that you can't really do the done in one adventures and do the reboot. I
Yeah.
felt like the reboot was more important, and so uh, there was something I was trying to go with this. Um, uh, well, I guess it wasn't important because I forgot it, but I think ultimately, uh, for me, it was sort of just like figuring out like how do we make everything like still kind of feel like a compelling chapter, even though it is sort of a more traditional kind of like multi-part storyline. So, yeah, I think with Captain Planet, now I remember my train of thought, is that we couldn't have him summoned in every issue.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole, first off, you got to give him threats that are worth his time. But secondly, the Planeteers have no powers when he's around.
Exactly. I noticed that like that was always annoying in the original show, but then you also show the agency of what can they still do when they don't have the powers.
Yeah, and so for me, similar to like Space Ghost, where I think the secret for Space Ghost is yes, it is titled Space Ghost, but it really is Jan and Jace's story. I think
Yes.
same thing for Captain Planet is that it's not really Cap's story; it's really the Planeteer's story, and so they're
Yeah.
really they're the focal points of the whole thing. It's X-Men meets Avatar,
Or like another spin on it, it's like to harken back to the Power Rangers conversation. It's like you almost like reverse Zordon, where the kids make Zordon the Power Ranger in a way.
yeah, yeah,
Like they unite in that aspect. And you're like he doesn't have to be here every episode, but he's still an influence. He's still guiding in some way, kind of like
yeah.
how you did with Mati in that way.
And so that's where we're like having Captain Planet as sort of the Jiminy Cricket on Mati's shoulder. That was our way of sort of like he's still a part of this story, even if the rings aren't all together, even if they can't summon him fully. And that was sort of my way of like that's how we can have him in every issue, and that's how we can still have him be a part of this. And but yeah, I mean every issue. That's the hardest part about Captain Planet as a book for me is not so much the characters, not even so much the themes. It's about you have to build the whole thing around when and where is Captain Planet at any given moment.
Yup.
And it's very much a Rubik's cube kind of thing. It's in many ways it was the hardest book I wrote. Well, no, Cable was the hardest book I wrote this year, but it was certainly up there because yeah, you have to kind of plan out every single issue. Yeah, what's Cap doing in any particular moment?
Yeah.
You can't cheat readers out of like Captain Planet showing up in the book, but
Mm.
at the same time, he can't just be like, he can't be in action every issue and have the Planeteers in action every
Oh, for sure.
because you're still burning at least 5% of your page count just summoning them. So,
It's like how like Boom has the morphing seeds. It's like you're gonna need a morphing seed. You have to have the powers unite seed.
yeah, so yeah, that was the reasoning of why we had sort of like the ghost of Cap, like,
Right.
appearing through this was
I
just
love the coloring of the shadow for him too, though.
yeah.
That's such a great way to go about that.
Yeah, Amon Casellas, I mean, this is very much his baby, just as it is mine. And, the way that he kind of interpreted all the characters, like he and I had a lot of discussions about it, but that's ultimately all him. Like he's the one who gave Cap the beard. He
And then,
drew.
like the earthy tone around it isn't just like he's there in the suit. No, like you add a little bit more. You see
Yeah,
him transform. It isn't just a superhero. No, he has that elemental control about him
yeah.
here too.
Honestly, if we had more time, we would have pushed it even harder. It's one of those things that when we were coming up with the book, we were kind of on a tight time frame because we were aiming for that Earth Day release, and then
Yeah.
unfortunately, the diamond of it all kind of messed up that release schedule. But so it's one of those things. When I had talked with Amon about it, I was like, I don't want Captain Planet to just be like a normal person. Like I want it to be like he's like Superman meets Metamorpho. That like whole
Yeah.
body is made out of the elements, and so he's got these like rocky shoulder pauldrons, and his hair is made out of green fire, and his skin feels like ice, um and his eyes are this impossible blue. And so Amon did a really neat job with it, I thought. And that it does, and I think it was a bold kind of visual choice that sort of really
Yeah.
cements this is our Captain Planet. Like this is not.
Right. Like that first image. It's like we're doing this. Okay, we're doing this.
And so, yeah, I think Amon did a really neat job with all of that. And yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. I can't tell you. It really does speak to, I think, the different demographics in the business where, for men, it was pretty split. Well, I think maybe more in favor of the beard than not. A lot of people are like, yeah, man, you give him a beard. Heck yeah. Like, fellow beard enthusiasts. Um,
Yes.
Women, like universally, every single woman I've talked to who has read this book was like, damn, Captain Planet's hot. Um, and I think that's nice. I think that's really cool. Like because Captain Planet's a property that I think a lot of people kind of turn their nose up. They think
Yeah.
it is kind of dated or of its
It's a
time.
meme for a lot of people.
Yeah, Don Cheadle. And
Yep.
for me, I see it as Captain Planet is dated because it was meant to reflect the world outside its window. It was the world outside its window in 1989.
Yup.
That's why he had the mullet. That's why he had the crop top. That's, why, Linka had her little like synthesizer, guitar. Like it was meant to reflect the world outside its window then. For us, we were really trying to be like, how does this represent the world outside your window in the year
Now.
5? When things have gotten a lot worse, when sort of the tech bro oligarchy has sort of like kind of taken over the country,
Yeah.
and the fact that like we haven't really cared about environmentalism in any concrete way in like 20 years, and now we're
Right.
seeing exactly what the results of that are.
Like
So
it almost referenced like the South Park episode where they like apologize to Al Gore, where it's like, we're sorry,
yeah,
we messed up, we didn't listen. Now it's like you're trying to see the ramifications of not listening with that book.
yeah, and I get it. Like environmentalism is often seen as hypothetical and not particularly sexy, and that's the thing that we really try to kind of lean in on. Not just making Captain Planet sexy, but I think I think just like showing that like, you know, like okay, greenhouse gases and sort of, emissions and all that. Like sure, that doesn't seem sexy, but what happens when you've got like a hurricane that's about to like wipe out your
Yup.
suddenly it becomes very pressing. And so yeah, I think that was sort of our goals for that book, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. And I just got back from New York Comic Con and like seeing how many people came over and were like, "Oh man, like I love Captain Planet." I don't think that's something that like most people would say about most Captain Planet media, and so
Yeah,
I feel
you're
very
definitely changing the narrative, especially like because you have Thundercats, like you have Space Ghost. Like I Francesco Mattina covers for Space Ghost. Like you're doing things that no one ever thought would happen with this medium.
yeah.
Like it's so cool to see that like we're allowing IPs to shift because you kind of saw a little bit with the Hanna-Barbera with DC with like Scooby Apocalypse, but like now you're seeing this like you guys are like saying no, we're gonna do modern, we're gonna have fun with it, and we're gonna tell narratives that challenge your expectations.
Yeah, I feel like Daniel Warren Johnson was really the tip of the spear for all this. I think what he did on Transformers certainly was a big
Yes.
influence on me. And I think before his run on Transformers, I think it was very easy to turn your nose up at licensed books. I think it was easy for people to say like, it's just a cash grab. We're not going to
Right.
deliver our best work. It's going to be just like a lost season of whatever show, just to appeal to the diehards. And I think going back to what we were talking about earlier, like with these nostalgia properties, like nobody really knows like the mythology of like Space Ghost or Captain Planet or like Speed Racer like the back of their hand. They are
Right.
just like, oh well, like and so I think it helps head off some of that anticipation because you can't be like, oh well, you know, um, Kim Jugger is going to show up in Speed Racer. Most people are like, who's Kim Jugger?
Right.
And so it's harder for them to sort of lock in on like, well, what's the like what's
Well, let's
what
spin at
here?
Speed Racer a little bit because, like, that's a different dynamic. Because not only is it a different publisher,
Yeah,
but then also you're working with one of my favorite people of all time, Mark Russell, and like you're creating a new like system where it almost feels like anime inspired when it comes to certain things of the covers, at least. But it's like who I need to know whose idea it was to make Spritel an influencer.
that's me.
Like that's the one thing that like kept bugging me. I'm like, really, Spritel's an influencer? Really?
Well, that came about because I just like Space Ghost. I watched every episode of Speed Racer to prep for this, and I think there's something
Even the
very
next generation, though.
not Next Generation because that's a separate license. But I actually am not legally allowed to use anything from Next Generation.
Really? I
Yeah,
didn't know that. That's
it's
crazy.
a seperate rights situation. So
Wow.
that's why you're never going to see like Cannonball Taylor in my book as much as I think
Okay.
it's a killer name. And there are certain things like Trixie, for example. We had a different name for her planned, and we found out that was a name from like Next Generation, so we couldn't use that. So we had to
Yeah.
change her name. What happened with Spritle is, I watched all those old cartoons, and I think there's something very timeless and elemental about Speed Racer as a concept that is a reason why it's endured for as long as it has.
Mm.
However, Spritle in those original cartoons was, we will generously say, a product of its time.
Yeah.
And if I tried to play Spritle straight from the way that it was in the cartoon, I would have got myself canceled. You know, like it would have felt like some sort of like weird punching down, and I didn't
Yeah.
want to do that. Like, just like with Jan and Jace, like we wanted to give them a sense of agency. Um, Spritle was the last thing I cracked in when I was putting together this outline, and the
Most
way
definitely.
the way that I kind of came to the conclusion with him is Speed's part of a racing family, and so
Hmm.
they come together through this shared love of Formula X racing, but they exhibit it each in their own unique way.
Right. They find their own love for it, but like it's still a family dynamic.
Yeah, Speed is this prodigy, but he's also kind of doing this to like kind of chase the ghost of his dead brother, like
Yeah.
that's his brother is gone, and so this is the way he connects with him, and it and honors his memory.
Mhm.
Pops, is saw it Formula X through the lens of mechanics and building things, and at the same
Right.
time, losing his son Rex kind of broke him, and so he's sort of he's lost the love of his art, and
Mhm.
and has left him kind of a broken man, and he's going to have to come back to the fold when he realizes Speed is doing all this. Um, and then meanwhile, Racer X, like he's sort of had this second life now. Like everybody thinks that Rex Racer is dead, but meanwhile, he's sort of this revenant on the roads. Like he sees
Mhm.
racing as a way to sort of like settle old scores and balance the scales and protect his family, and stop the people who kind of ruined his life from ruining anybody else's.
Right.
Um, Trixie, it's all about preserving her family legacy. I mean, that's why she and Speed get along so well. She's an owner, though. She's not a driver.
Yeah.
And so for her, there's like that bigger sense of responsibility because she's got to keep everything together. And so for me, it was like Spritle, like we don't have a color commentator. and
Yeah.
and so that's for him, that's our way in, is that like he is sort of like the streetwise hustler, the Twitch streamer. He's the guy who's like egging everybody to bet big on Speed, and that's their way of
Yeah.
like how do they make ends meet financially, but also just like Spritle he is young Speed without the baggage. He doesn't
Yup.
he wasn't old enough to really know Rex before Rex died, or
Yeah.
so like he doesn't have that baggage. He doesn't have those wounds. He doesn't have that
Mm.
trauma. And so for him, it's all enthusiasm. He maybe doesn't have the skill that Speed does, but he,
Right.
he can talk a mile a minute. And so, for him, kind of having that partnership of sort of this is his way of being in Speed's world, of helping any way he can. Um, that felt a little more timely. That felt like a way of giving Spritle his own agency and his own sense of humor and his own attitude. I
Right.
love writing Spritle now, but it was one of those things that for a long time I was like, "What the hell am I going to do with this guy?" Like, because in the original cartoon, he's very much like he's always the hostage. He's always
Yep.
sort of like screwing things up for Speed. He's always sort of like putting himself in danger for no reason. And this way we
Exactly.
could kind of like justify some of these tendencies in that, like, he's doing
He's
it for
doing
the
it for the
brand.
clicks.
Yeah, he's he wants those subscribers. He's gonna, it's a little Jimmy Olsen in that way.
Yes.
That like, he will sometimes do stupid things in order to like get the right shot. But yeah, he's wound up being like a really fun character because he is the comic relief, and I
Right.
think even more than like somebody like Jace in Space Ghost. I think Spritle, I think, is even more heightened. Like a little bit of him goes a long way.
Oh,
Um,
most definitely.
but I love, as you'll see it as the series continues. Like I love this kind of like kid brother older sister dynamic that he's getting with Trixie, and it wasn't
Mm.
something I really intended, but they're often on the sidelines together. They're the ones sort of watching everything unfold, and so like they wind up talking with each other a decent amount, and so
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it was definitely one of those things. I was like, oh boy, it took me a long time to crack Spritle, but that felt like the way of like sort of making this thing feel very modern, and sort of giving him something to do in this sort of greater constellation of racers.
That makes a lot of sense. And like, I honestly, like something you said just kind of clicked to me as I'm like scrolling through like my notes is that like you were able to put a monkey in all three books. Like, was there an intent there? Like, there's a monkey in Captain Planet, there's a monkey in Space Ghost, there's a monkey in Speed Racer.
and I
And
have
granted, like two of those are kind of like you expect, but like you nailed all three back to back.
and I have a bunch of winged monkeys in my creator handbook, the OZ. So I really am comics' leading monkey laureate, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, it was not intentional by any means. It was definitely one of those, Speed Racer and Captain Planet actually kind of materialized within about a week of each other. And so I went from like 2 monkey books to double those monkey books in like a very short order. And we did talk for a while about whether or not we were going to have Chim Chim in the book. Because when you write these things, you usually don't have an artist attached off the jump. So you're kind of like, and the art sets the tone so much for what the book is going to be. And so you're kind of writing these things a little blind in that regard of just like, you don't really, you sort of have an idea of what the tone might be, but the art might change it quite a bit,
Sure.
And so I think when I was originally writing my pitch, I was thinking probably even a little bit darker, like a little bit like I remember talking about like the movie Drive, with Ryan Gosling.
Oh, okay.
And Baby Driver,
well, you could just do Twisted Metal if you really wanted to, like Death Race with it. Like there were so many ways you could have did this.
Yeah, and I think as we were sort of like leaning into like the gadgets of it all, like it already like the tone was starting to get lighter, and then when David Tinto joined the book, like that really kind of like open us up to sort of like I think a little bit more of like a Western manga kind of style. And so yeah, we talked. It was kind of in the 11th hour that we decided to put Chim Chim in after all, and I think it was the thinking was like, what's the harm of having him in the mix versus like if you leave him out, it's sort of like having an ice cream sundae, but you've left the cherry off. People are going to be like, "That's nice, but where's my cherry?"
Right. Exactly. So, like, where's the monkey? Like, we need the monkey here.
Yeah. Well, like we talked a little bit of it first that the monkey was going to be like Spritel's branding.
Ooh, that would have been clever though.
But as I thought about it and as I was writing Spritel more, I kind of like this idea that there's like some sort of untold story that like one night Spritel just like went out and had like this night of like just crazy teenage debauchery and then came home and won a monkey in a bet. And like and he came home and like there's a whole like the racers had a whole story of like, why did you bring home a monkey? Like, how did you get a monkey? Like, should we be calling animal control? And Spritel's like, no, he's trained. Like I want him.
He's a vibe, but just go with it.
I want him fair and square, and they're kind of like, well, I guess like we've had weirder things happen, like I feel like if there's another Tales from the Road story down the line, I would love for somebody to tell the story of how Spritel met Chim Chim, because I think there's something like a teenage version of like The Hangover or something that like could really
for sure.
But yeah.
I am curious about though, like we're seeing it's Alyssa's like and then it just got released, the Racer X book that's tied to this.
Yeah.
What like as someone who is very passionate about Mark Russell's work as well as your work, and like both of you are very well acquainted with like changing and modernizing characters from existing IPs. What is that relationship like? Trying to balance what's happening over there, what's happening over here, especially when it's like back to back in the same month of each other.
Yeah.
What story are you trying? It's almost like how in the New 52 you saw like Action Comics was a prequel, and then the main book with Superman was like in the present. What can you do here that you can't do there, kind of thing?
Yeah, well, I think it's very much rooted in voice and tone. I think Mark's a very smart guy, and I've known him for a while. Like he was kind enough to give like a pull quote when I did the OZ, and so really nice guy, very smart. And so in a lot of ways, like he kind of makes, he sort of feels like my personal Racer X, and I feel a little like Speed sometimes, because Mark grew up with this stuff, and he loves Racer X, and so for me, like my goal is to make Speed Racer like if that's the only book you read, you get a satisfying beginning, middle, and end. Like you don't have to read other books in order to understand our work. And Mark, meanwhile, is sort of doing like a very different tone. He's doing sort of the noirish kind of like much more crime oriented book. We have some crime undertones in ours, but like he's delving into like the underworld of it all, the Alpha Automotive and the car acrobatic team. And, these books are all meant to read differently, it's not meant to be like, I don't want to do like multiple flavors of like vanilla, for example, like
most definitely.
like
it's like you're above the road. He's under under the road in the underground. Like he's like the whole thing's going on up here, almost like a Scooby-Doo cartoon where something else is going on underneath the road.
Well, and also just Mark like is very much, he's got his own voice and it's very distinctive, and so it's good for him to kind of lean into like the noir and the cerebral, kind of getting into Racer X's head a bit as a sort of
Most definitely, yeah.
He's a driver who's the son of a designer, and so he does see things in that realm more than Speed does. But also like you'll see in the Racer X book, like there will be times where it kind of veers into what we're doing. Like you'll sort of see something that we've done in the main book, but you'll get to see it from Rex's eyes instead of Speed's. But the scripts that I've read, I think I've read the first 3. Mark's going to be doing 2 4-part arcs, as I recall. And so from what I've read from the first 3 issues, like those issues are primarily, you see sort of Racer X just doing his own thing, but then every so often you'll see some scenes where you're like, oh, hey, I know that race from the main book. But I think the thing that I've always said is like, it's still very much its own thing. Like it's all meant to be additive, but I don't want anybody to read like Racer X #1, for example, and see it as, oh, well, this is Speed Racer issue 2.5.
Right.
They are meant to be their own things. Yeah, I think, and as you see more and more sort of Speed Racer media coming out, like Mark London, for example, has Tales from the Road. He does the headlining story in the first issue, and I've got a Spritle and Chim Chim backup in there.
Okay.
And that's like very much like almost like a Liam Neeson action movie kind of take on Racer X, where it's seeing him on an Interpol mission, taking down some sort of crime boss, and he and Sebastian Perez have done an amazing job on it. I read it for the first time over the weekend, and it reminded me a lot of, honestly, of like what Chris Condon is doing in Ultimate Wolverine in terms of like distribution, a lot of letting the art do the talking. And so I told Mark, I thought Mark London, I thought it was fantastic. But you'll see, like, as more and more Speed Racer media comes out, and I think similar to Gotchaman, you'll be seeing more and more of that coming, over the next few years. Every book is meant to have its own flavor. Every book is
that's really cool. Yeah, I'm excited. Like, because I've read Mark's work before, back when because he was the one who even like approached me back when we were doing the original show, and it was like, hey, will you check out some of our work? And I was like, sure. And like even when they were doing things like Battle Cats, like they weren't afraid to take risks, and I like that you guys are like given that freedom to do different variants of the same thing. Like this is going on this direction, but like it's going on like parallel. It's still different perspectives on the same world.
Yeah, I mean, I will give Mark London a quick shout out, because I've had a lot of good bosses in the comics industry, but Mark London is far and away the best boss I've ever had. He really, like, he stands behind his creators 110%. He is so passionate about the business, about the industry, but he's passionate about us creators. And I think that's something that it's very easy to be jaded. It's very easy to sort of see things just in terms of a spreadsheet. It's very easy to sort of say, like, creators come and go, and so not to get too attached. But Mark really broke the mold, and he is a publisher that is loyal to his creators, and that's
really good to hear
in this business. And so I tell him this every time I see him, that I'm like, that's the reason why everybody at Mad Cave likes working at Mad Cave. Because it's,
I've never heard one bad story come out of Mad Cave. Like, I remember, like, I've always followed it, even when I took a break from doing the show. Like, that was the one publisher. Like, you guys in Volt have been like the ones who have kind of like been the next generation of Image, where it's like you could do creator own, you could do new ideas, and not be afraid to like step in those worlds and have those experiences.
Yeah, I mean, so it's one of those things. Like, I've had such great experiences with Mad Cave, between The Devil That Wears My Face and my new book 10-Ton Titan Terrier, and now and Speed Racer. Like, it's a good crew. I really like working with them, and I think that it starts with Mark London. I think if he ever left the company, I'd be the next one out the door. Like, he really is the real deal in a way that you don't often see in this business. So yeah, so it was really nice to be able to like actually ride shotgun with him in this Tales from the Road anthology, and I thought he did an excellent job.
That's a great metaphor. Like, good job with that. That was a great.
So yeah, I think this Speed Racer book is it's unlike anything I've ever written before because at its core it's a sports drama. It's
Yeah.
Rocky in a race car, it's Hamlet in a racing helmet. And I I think being able to sort of focus the drama and the stakes through that lens, that there is danger because they are race car drivers and things can really
Yeah.
hurt them. But ultimately it comes down to like Speed has to win this championship if he wants to save his father's life. And so there's no room for second place with any of that.
Yeah.
Um, and so that keeps the stakes, I think, very emotional, very personal. And at the same time, we're still doing we're doing Speed Racer is being told almost exclusively in done in one and done in twos. And so we're able to
Okay.
kind of like really every issue has a car chase, and so that's been like
Yeah.
a unique and fun challenge. Is like how do we fit all that in every issue?
How do you make it different each
How do
time?
you make it differ each time? How do you vary up the choreography? And so I'm really thrilled with how we kind of how we've planned that out and how that's coming together. So it's been a fun book. And
Most definitely, yeah.
if you like what we're doing on Space Coast, you're gonna love what we're doing on Speed Racer. Those books share a lot of DNA together in terms of their approaches, and yeah, and just also the fact that I'm working with such incredible artists. I mean, Jonathan Lau on Space Ghost and David Tinto on Speed Racer. They are fast, they are talented, they are excellent storytellers. So I feel like they both inspire me to bring my A game, and they certainly they draw like damn Terminators, both of them. They are constantly burning through scripts at sometimes an alarming rate. And so, it's good. It keeps me on my toes because I want to keep up
They're
with
like,
them.
we want more. Give us more.
Yeah, yeah. It's very much like, didn't I just turn the script in? And they're like, give me another script. And so it's a wonderful champagne problem to have because that means that the books remain consistent visually. And so I love working with those guys. Cannot speak highly enough of both of them. And so, yeah, we've got fun stuff ahead for both of those books.
Excellent. So, like the one thing I wanted to wrap up, like
Yep.
as you know, we always do a like a closing statement at every episode, and it's like you have a unique perspective where it's like you started small, you went big, and now you're kind of in the medium. You're in like rising stars that have kind of hit a great medium where they're doing IPs, but they're also doing unique work of their own.
Sure.
What do you have, especially because we've seen this advent of creator-owned books rising on TikTok, and like that's like a great place to kind of like farm new talent in its own right, or like find new unique stories. What do you like tell not only like both fans but also like creators who feel as if it's so hard to like venture out of the big two bubble? What do you tell people like that?
Boy, I mean, I think it always comes down to whether or not you're vibing with it. I mean, look, it comes in waves. And I think people will come into the business and they will love superheroes, and that's fine. That's how a lot of people get their start. And sometimes that's all they read, and that's totally valid. But I think oftentimes if you're in the business long enough, you're eventually the wave is gonna kind of come, it's going to crash down, and you're going to feel like
Yeah.
I'm not vibing with the things I'm reading. And so then it ultimately comes to a decision on the reader's part, which is, do you branch out and try something new? Or do you say, okay, I'm done with comics because I'm done with superheroes? And, I always prefer the former than the latter, but you can't force anybody to it. But I think,
Right.
for me, I think, you know, I got my start reading creator-owned comics. I mean, first, it was like Spawn,
Yes.
Spawn and Crimson, where, I think those were very much like they were superhero tinged, but they were sort of off the beaten path. And that's a great place to start is, stuff like Space Ghost, for example, not to toot my own horn, but that's a superhero thing that's not in the universes that
It's adjacent. It lets you get a little bit out of your
yeah.
comfort zone.
But also like it's one of those things. Even if you're a diehard superhero fan, reading creator-owned books, that's often where you see the next generation of talent. And yet at the
Yeah.
same time, like I, I think that's maybe why I like playing with genres so much. Is that like I love superheroes, but if all I ever read were superheroes, I'd get tired of it really fast. Being able to
Yeah.
kind of like vary up your diet is like I think really important to sort of like finding things that you like. And maybe you like crime books, maybe you like sci-fi, maybe you like horror. There's all sorts of cool things you can find, whether it's a writer you like or an artist you like. And so I think that's what kind of like keeps me in the business is just like I read all sorts of different things. And so I think, there's plenty of, if there's a superhero writer you like, chances are they've got a whole mountain of creator-owned work that you should go back
Yeah.
and check out. But also just like if you're not vibing with something, then, check out something at Image, check out something at Mad Cave, check out something at Dynamite. Like there's all sorts of publishers out there that have their own unique vibes to them that all have really interesting stuff that you can check out. But
Yeah.
I think it comes down to just like what are you vibing on right now? I mean, if you're just vibing on Marvel and DC, I don't think there's anything wrong with that personally.
Yeah.
I think it's just a matter of if you're not vibing with that stuff. And I think no matter how good the material is, I think that's just a part of every reader's life cycle after a certain
I think you just found like the title of the episode. It's like vibing through comics.
vibing through
Like
comics.
you kind of just found the right way to like illustrate this.
Yeah, like I think it's part of every reader's life cycle is that eventually they hit a critical mass of whatever book, whatever genre they started with, and then they feel, burned out because of course, like I love pizza, but if I ate pizza every day for like 5 years, I'd be sick of pizza no matter how good the pizza
Yeah, no,
is.
like a perfect example is that like I had just launched everything back when we originally did the show, and like around the same time I had got burnt out from like doing Teen Titan reviews for the website, and I found Spencer and Locke and I found Wasted Space from Vault at the same time,
Yeah,
and both of those books like saved me from just giving up
yeah,
because you both like both you and like you like that Wasted Space, you gave me these different narratives, you gave me this different perspective
yeah.
on things that I'm comfortable with, but then you defied expectations, and it made me feel like I could find love in comics beyond just a cape and a cowl.
Yeah, and again, like I think, listen, I read plenty of superhero books. Batman Dark Patterns and Superman the Kryptonite Spectrum and Godzilla versus Marvel Universe. Those are three books that I find to be a genuine joy. And so like you can find things that you like, but yeah, I feel like for me, like comics are more than just superheroes. I love superheroes. It's a core part of why I like comics, but like it's a medium and there's
Yeah.
so much that the medium has to offer. And so, you don't necessarily have to check out my books, although it does keep my puppy fed and kibble. But like, if you don't like my books or, my books don't speak to you, there's like a million other great writers out there, who are all doing interesting things. And so, yeah, sometimes it takes a little bit of work. Sometimes, it's checking out a review. I think honestly, looking at previews of books is, I think, really critical. I mean, there's so many books that I have discovered over the years that like I would never have checked them out based on like the solicit copy.
Oh yeah.
I think all the time about what Marjorie Liu and Daniel Way and a young upstart named Giuseppe Camuncoli, did on Dark Wolverine back during the Cool Brain era,
Yes.
where like I remember when that book was announced and I was just like I don't care whatever, and then I saw preview art of it and I was like this art is sensational. What is this book? And that book, like I love that book. I think
Mm.
about that book all the time. If there's no Dark Wolverine fans in the world, it means I died. Um, you know, so like I feel like I, and I know it's tough. There's so many things competing for people's attention, and not just in comics, but across a variety of different mediums, and also the state of the world right now and the
Yeah.
economy. And but I would say that like do a little digging. There's plenty of websites out there that do previews, Adventures in Poor Taste, Bleeding Cool, Graphic Policy, just to name a
Comics
few.
beat all of them.
Comics Beat, like you can find previews of whatever's coming out in any particular week and
Mm.
just be like, oh, well, that looks interesting. Let me check that out.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so yeah, I
You gotta
think
find the vibe.
you got to find the vibe. You got to find the thing that like speaks to you, and maybe maybe it's a cerebral creator own thing. Maybe it's like just kind of like an idea that feels so crazy you want to see if it works. Or maybe it's
Yeah.
just like oh hey like I really like what Rick Remender did in Uncanny Avengers or Uncanny X-Force. I'm gonna check out his book Escape is really good and it's deserving all the amazing reviews it's getting because it's basically Black Sad meets World War II. And so like that, there's something for everybody out there. You might have to do a little bit of digging, but what I can say is that I promise it'll be worth it.
Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap things up. But no, thank you so much for being a part of
Oh,
this.
it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's so good catching up with you.